Yes, Dr. F-Man, welcome back to the Black Room. Jazz, what are we talking about next?
I want to talk about the dilution almost of the whole movement and how it's now almost being encapsulated in a wider diversity conversation. So I had a session at work a couple of weeks ago, and I had a number of the senior leadership and a global call, and the focus was all around diversity. Now there was a very specific element of that, which was about Black Lives Matter. Part of it was around like sexual orientation and that sort of experience, and some of it about females' experience in the workplace. So it was very segmented into these three key areas. And I feel like there's an element of the Black Lives Matter movement kick-starting that diversity conversation and therefore diluting the power of the Black Lives Matter movement specifically. What's your experience and thoughts about that?
That is a loaded question. That is very, very tricky. So part of me feels, and this is genuinely me shooting from the hip, part of me feels that if the conversation about diversity is happening and everybody wins, how can it be bad? Equally, and this might be controversial, part of me feels as though the black voice has been not been given the opportunity to make its demands heard and it just be us. It almost feels as though every time we say us, somebody else says, what about us? And that, to a certain extent, is a little bit frustrating because the issues that impact us are very different, and I feel as though I don't necessarily even feel as though it's good for the other communities that are being lumped into that diversity conversation, because everybody deserves the opportunity to have their specific diversity and inclusion issue addressed separately. And so when you lump it into a diversity monolith, I think you lose some of the nuance in the individual experience of people that are involved in that. So to that extent, I think, well, it's probably not good for anybody, really. But I also do feel as though that, in particular, the LGBT Q plus community has been instrumental in demonstrating to certainly me, and I would argue more broadly the black community, that this is what it looks like when somebody is taking your issue seriously. Because we've seen the reaction that's come from corporations, sports entities, all these celebrities. And so I almost feel as though the movement for black people needs to aspire to the level of reaction that we've seen. And so part of me feels as though, if we can have the conversation about diversity and the LGBT community is there, and they can say, well, this is the experience that we've had and this is how we move the needle, then we all benefit from having listened to that, because I do feel as though that is sort of what we kind of need to be aspiring to in terms of how an outward reflection of having your issue taken seriously can look like. What do you reckon?
Do you know what? I walked away from that session so I didn't know how I felt. Because the session itself, if I look at it entirely objectively, it was a great session, really insightful, and it's really good to hear about other people's experience as well, from a female perspective, from a gay guy perspective, and from a black woman's perspective as well. So I think on the whole, the session was valuable, and then I was like, but hold on a minute. The reason this session is in place right now is because of everything that's going on with the Black Lives Matter movement. But 1/3 of the session, so not even a half, 1/3 was focused on that. And I don't think I liked it. Ultimately. I think there's an importance in the wider diversity conversation, because each of the groups needs to continue to move their own dial. And I think there is something that we can learn from, as you say, LGBTQ, and how things have worked. I feel like the dilution, which I'm personally experiencing and seeing so far, is too early. There will be a point where that can reform itself. Absolutely. But I think at this point, the focus needs to be specific. The way that I am as a person, the way that I work, the way that I learn. If I try and learn 5 things at the same time, I'm going to learn 5 things terribly. If I focus on one, get good at that, then I might start a second, but I'm still good at the first, and bring it back in. And I feel like at the moment, from my experience anyway, some of those like merging it all together,
Yeah.
pieces are happening too soon.
Yeah, I think I tend to agree. I think, like I say, I think there's benefits, but I think you're absolutely right. I think your point about ensuring that we understand each of the individuals' issues separately is important, because you can either do all of them half, or you can do each of them over a longer period of time better. And I think it's important to take that time to understand each diversity group's specific needs and nuance, before you can start to try and bring everybody back into a big group.
Absolutely. You can get onto like Bane again.
Yeah.
Throw them all together, but as
Yeah.
you say, each diversity group is different, and until there's a fundamental understanding of like the needs, the challenges at a granular level. Like, this isn't surface level stuff. If you try and give me a surface level solution, which I think is probably what we've been doing for the last however many years, in 10 years, 15 years time, we're going to be where we are today. Like, we need to have a granular approach to this, in my view. If we really want to make change which is going to be sustainable over time, we need to go bottom up and get to the root. Rather than just meshing things together.
You're right. We've talked about it before. We've talked about addressing symptoms and superficial things, and we talked about addressing root causes. And I think it's important that in order to move the dial, you must address the root causes. And I don't think you can address the root causes if you lump everybody into a single diversity group, when the individual issues of those diverse people are very, very separate. And I've had people from completely different backgrounds, Iranian, Mexican, talk about their own personal experiences and how this has made them reflect on their own personal experiences. And I think that's excellent. That's exactly what it needs to do. But your experiences will be very different to the experiences that I've had. There will be elements that converge, but there will be experiences, there will be things that happen that need to be dealt with very, very separately. And I think it's important that we don't just merge them all together. So I think I agree with you.
And how do we deal with that though? Because they're being merged. So like, I'm seeing it in front of my eyes, and like, mine is a very specific example to what I've seen. And don't get me wrong, I think some of the things that my organisation is doing are brilliant, but I am seeing it being merged. Admittedly, I'm not taking any action on that at this point. But from the conversation we've just had, we've kind of both just acknowledged that, like, merging this isn't going to work. Like, we've seen kind of that before. There's been like diversity groups and all that. That's all existed already. Like, it's been there for a long time. It's not new. So how do we? Is our responsibility, and particularly with things coming out of the mainstream and now going into the background of things just happening? How do we ensure that, like, we get to the root?
We've got to be vocal. I mean, I think we have to talk. I think this is the importance of things like the Black Room. I think, it's easier in your particular, in the scenario just described, for you to see that merging of the groups into a diversity group. Whereas in my personal situation, we haven't moved as far forward as you guys have. So I'm yet to see how it's going to play out. But I do think we've got a responsibility to ensure that we're vocal about things that we may not necessarily agree with, without providing sound rationale as to why those things may not necessarily be the right way to address the issue.